In fact, it's such a pleasure that I hopped in my car and drove here, all excited about today's talk. Julia Pelton came to Halifax 10 years ago for her undergrad degree in, get the combination here, environmental science and international development studies. Nice combination there. But she did it at another university somewhere else up the road, as we like to say from here. And then after that, worked for 6 years with Clean Nova Scotia, now known as Clean Foundation, on environmental projects, on environmental engagement, sustainable transportation, youth employment, and home energy efficiency. Then last year, I guess, 2015, started in the MBA program here at the Sobey School of Business. So also, I'm very pleased to say the first student speaker in this term, so that's great. And connecting now in her MBA program, the environmental interests with social entrepreneurship aspects. So Julia, people can see your title. I know it's about car sharing, so I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for coming.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for coming today. I know that the weather's not great out there. So just before we get started, like Tony said, my background's in environmental science and international development studies. I worked at an environmental organization for 6 years, and one of the projects I worked on there was Retire Your Rides. So we got people out of their old vehicles and working to get them using more active forms of transportation and alternative forms of transportation like car share. So at that point, I developed a relationship with the local car share company here called Car Share Halifax. So when I entered into the MBA program here, you have the opportunity to either do a consulting project or a research project. And I really wanted to do something that was in the environmental field and that I could give back to the community. So I went to Car Share Halifax and I said, are there any business needs that you have that I could help research and fulfill my requirements for the program and get my degree. So that's where this project really came about. And Dr. Chantal Hervieux, she does a lot of work with social enterprises. She's pretty new to the Sobey School of Business, but has a lot of background here. So she was my supervisor throughout this process. So I'll just give you a quick agenda of what we're going to go over today. So I'll do a little bit of background, kind of what Car Share Halifax is. The research objectives for this project, I'll give you the highlights of the literature review because I'm sure you don't want to go through the nitty-gritty of that. The research methodology, the findings, recommendations, and the conclusion. So as we know, our the world markets are reaching their capacity to govern resources in a sustainable manner. And what's happened in the last few years is there's been an emergence of the sharing economy. So this is where people have access to products or services through a network. Examples of this would be, Uber cars or Airbnb, the Bixi system in Montreal that you can rent bicycles for short periods of time. And car sharing falls into this. So this is where people have access to a vehicle on an hourly or daily rate, and they don't have to own that vehicle. So the car share organization takes care of the insurance, the maintenance, and they manage that fleet of vehicles. So Car Share Halifax, they started in 2008 here in Halifax. They now have over 1,000 members. They have 35 vehicles, so those vehicles are across the Halifax Peninsula and in downtown Dartmouth. And members have access to these vehicles 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and they pay only based on what they're using. So when I talked to Car Share Halifax, what they said that they're having an issue with is getting into the multi-residential building development sector. So if you look at other cities that have established car share networks, what's happening is when developers are building either condos or apartment buildings, there's usually a set guideline that the municipality has that says for every unit that you're building, you have to build one parking spot in the basement. Or if it's surface parking or wherever. And so what other cities have been able to do through the municipal bylaws is the developers are able to get parking relaxation, so they don't have to build that 1-to-1 ratio if they incorporate car sharing into their building. So this saves the developer money, but it also, and through that savings, I should say, makes the building or the apartments and condos more affordable for people that are living there because those cost savings are being passed on to the consumer. But it also grows the networking of car sharing within that community. So it gives people more options about how they're getting around. And the whole philosophy from Pam Cooley, who's the president of Car Share Halifax, is she wants to, grow the car share network here and have people have more multimodal approach to transportation. So when they can walk, they're walking. When they can bike, they're biking. When they can take transit, they can take transit. But when they need a vehicle, they have access to one and they don't have to be paying all those expenses that come with vehicle ownership. And for a lot of people, those cars are sitting, in their driveway for the majority of the time. So that's really what this project is all about. So the research objectives, we're trying to figure out what is the value of car sharing in Halifax. So what's the value of car sharing for the municipality at that level? What's the value for residential building developers on the peninsula, downtown Dartmouth? But also, what's the value with other cities that have car sharing? And then we wanted to use this information to identify and inform business growth opportunities for the local car share organization. Is everyone with me? Does this make sense? Okay. So just going into a little bit of the literature review. Car sharing started in actually the 1940s in Europe. It came over across the pond in the 1990s, and it's grown tremendously in popularity. So in Canada, we have over 336,000 members with over 5,000 cars that are shared and 20 operators. In 2014, the growth of car share was 50% in Canada. So it's definitely a growing and emerging market. When you look at business models, I'll just bring that up briefly. There are different kinds of car sharing. The car sharing that we have here in Halifax is called a round trip car sharing. So you pick up the vehicle at one location, you use it to make all your trips, and then you have to return it to that location. There are other organizations and auto manufacturers that have one-way car sharing. So you'll pick up a car from one location, you can drive it across town for your meeting, park it there, and that's fine. And there's different rules in terms of having it within a geographical area, but there are different models that exist out there. When you're looking at who's doing car sharing, it's pretty diverse. It's 21 to 55-year-olds. It's people that are environmentally concerned. It's people that have high education and are professionals, and that don't have only have an occasional need for vehicles. When you're looking at user groups, it's neighborhoods, it's colleges, it's professionals that are using them. And the motivations usually are cost savings. So you're not paying that monthly leasing fee. You're not paying every time that you have to take it to the shop to get the tires switched or whatever. All those costs are maintained by the car share organization. You're only paying for the car as you need it. So when you look at urban planning and car sharing, even though there are these distinct groups that use car sharing more, how the city is planned and what the municipal policy actually plays a bigger role on how popular car sharing is in that city. So by 2050, it's estimated that the world's urban population is going to grow from 3.4 billion to 6.4 billion. So what that means is there's going to be huge growth of urban centers, and this threatens traffic patterns, so getting people around. How do you get them to where they're working, to where their homes are, to other amenities? It increases congestion, air pollution, and vehicle accidents. So cities, as most of you know, are key drivers to climate change. And car share presents a unique solution to try and mitigate some of those things. Obviously, it's not going to be the silver bullet, but it will help mitigate some of those issues as urban density increases. And when we look at municipal policy, so like I said, there's other cities that have incorporated parking relaxations within their bylaws so that developers can reduce the amount of parking that they have to build and incorporate car sharing. When that happens, you actually see a larger growth of the car sharing networks. You have more amenities for the people in those communities because they have other ways of getting around. Increase public amenities, grow car share organizations, and reduce the costs for the developers. So overall, the impacts of car share from the literature is that people actually that are members, they drive less than people that have cars, that they're planning their transportation trips differently. So they're walking more, they're biking more, they're taking public transportation more. They also forego the purchase of another vehicle, much more than people that already have a vehicle or are not members. And a lot of them sell their current vehicles. So each car share car that's on the road actually reduces the number of vehicles by 4.6 to 20 vehicles. So that's what you're taking off the road every time that there's a car share car out there. So that's the literature of what it's saying. So when we look at the research methodology that I used an emergent design process. So what I was trying to figure out is, other municipalities have these bylaws that exist. It helps to grow the network of car share cars. It helps developers. That cost gets passed on to consumers in terms of the tenants. So what I wanted to do and why I chose the emergent design process is that you're actually engaging the people and the organizations that are part of the issue to find what the issues are and what the solutions are. So through that, I did a series of interviews with different car share organizations across Canada. I interviewed the car share organization here. I interviewed 2 urban planners and then 5 residential building developers. And through this, I was trying to figure out what is their perception of car sharing? What are the enablers that would allow them to incorporate car sharing? And what are the barriers that exist? Through that, I also needed to use grounded theories. So I'm not an urban planner. I haven't delved a lot into bylaws. This was a new territory for me. So there was a lot of secondary research that I needed to go through to make sure that I understood what the process was. So through that, I had secondary data. So these are municipal planning documents. So I'm looking at land use bylaws. I'm looking at the regional plan and what Halifax is saying as a city. What do we want to look like in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? And then through this analysis, what I did was I transcribed all the interviews that I did. And I used a software called Atlas TI. And what I was able to do was code different themes that came out with the different stakeholder groups. So I had the car share organizations, I had the urban planners, and I had the residential building developers. So I was able to figure out what's really enabling this process and what are the barriers that exist. So that's what I'll go into right now. So when you're looking at the enablers, and just remember that these were car share organizations across the country that do have policies in place to, allow them to grow at the residential building developer level. You need to have that demand. So are people using this amenity that exists? And that demand comes a lot when you have good forms of public transportation. Public transportation and car share go hand in hand because people have other ways that they can get around and that they can be mobile and that they don't have to rely on having their own vehicle. The financial incentive, so what I mean there is by giving the developers a financial incentive and not having to build as many parking stalls. So in Halifax, each parking stall costs $20,000 to $60,000 to build if you're digging under the ground. So that depends where in the city you're doing it and what the substrate is, but $20,000 to $60,000. So if you can get rid of 10 parking spots, that's a huge financial incentive for the developer. So they want to go through this process with the city and car share to make this relationship happen. So that financial incentive is huge. The policy and parking easements, so if there's something stated in the bylaws saying, yes, these developers can get rid of this many parking spots, it's much easier than trying to navigate the system and negotiate without those policies in place. The public benefit's huge, so you're reducing the building costs. Again, that's getting passed on to the consumers, more affordable housing, but they also have more options of how they get around. And like I said, the relationship and the negotiation with those three parties, so the car share organization, the city, and the developer, is instrumental in allowing these things to work, and just the overall value. When you look at HRM planners, it comes down to things like complete transportation. So within the HRM regional plan, they're looking at, how do we get people around more effectively? Like, this is something the city wants to do. And right now, you've probably heard that they're looking at how Metro Transit is, and they're trying to redesign some of that process so that we get people around more efficiently here. One thing that's come up recently is density bonusing. So density bonusing is a tool that a municipality can use that falls outside of what the bylaws are. So if a developer wants to build a 10-story building next to St. Mary's University, but the bylaws say, no, you can only build an 8-story building. What the developer can do is they can go through something called density bonusing. And for the ability to build those extra 2 stories, they have to give something back to the public realm. So that can be maybe building a park for kids across the street, or maybe it's doing a public garden, or maybe it's incorporating a car share car that can then be used by the greater community. So what Halifax is doing right now is they're going through an entire study of what density bonusing is going to look like here. And they're looking at other municipalities and trying to figure out what the guidelines are that they've incorporated into their density bonusing and how that will look here. If you look at the HRM charter, density bonusing is actually, there's a lot of flexibility to bring that in. When you look at land use bylaws in Halifax, we still live in a very archaic system. So amalgamation happened at the HRM in 1995, I think it was maybe 96. And we still have 23 different bylaws that guide our city depending on what area you are in. And so it makes it difficult for developers that aren't only working in one zone, but working throughout the city. Whereas you can use something like density bonusing in any of those areas. So it's an interesting tool, and they're doing the research for that. Moving on. In terms of the parking reductions and the policy, our city, they want to be greener, they want to get people around more, they want to, be encouraging, small businesses and all these things, but it's not coming out in the building level yet. They're saying a lot of things, but they're not necessarily walking the walk, and they want those public benefits. So when you look at the residential building developers, they're seeing a lot of young professionals moving downtown on the peninsula or downtown Dartmouth. They want that financial incentive. They don't want to have to build extra parking spots if there aren't going to be people there. So one of the developers I actually talked to, he mostly caters to a student population, and he has 15 to 18% use of his parking lot at any given time. However, with him building a new building right now, he's going to the city and saying, I am going to cater to the same clientele. I know that I only need, X amount of parking spots, but the bylaws say I need to increase them to this amount. And the city's saying, no, you have to do, a 1-to-1 ratio or a 1-to-0.75 ratio. So he knows he's gonna have huge vacancy, and that cost of building those spots is going on to the student population that he's renting, these apartments to. So anyway, financial incentive is a big one. Municipal support, they say that the municipality is in support of innovative solutions to try and get people around. Whether that's happening on the ground or not is kind of a different story. Parking policy plays a huge role in terms of having those ratios and what they have to build. And they want the value added. So most developers are sitting there and they want to keep their tenants in their buildings, right? They don't want to have vacancies, so the more services that they can provide, the better for them. So what I did with all this information is there was essentially different network diagrams that were created. It showed the relationship between each of these points. And then what I did was I found the common themes and created an overarching network diagram that looks like this. So you have the enablers here, second to the top, and what you're seeing is contributing to incorporating car share at the multi-residential building development level is you need these things in place. So you need complete transportation. People need to have other modes of getting around, and they can't just be relying on single occupancy vehicles. There needs to be a parking policy in place that the developers can follow, that the car share organization can follow, that the municipality can follow. Urban planning is a big thing, so where does our city want to go? What does it look like? And then you also need a little bit of flexibility and support in there. You need to figure out what the value is. And this downtown lifestyle is really important. So, like I mentioned before, Car Share Halifax only operates on the peninsula in downtown Dartmouth. And we know that these places are getting denser in terms of people living there. Car Share doesn't operate on the outskirts yet. Maybe it will. But it wouldn't, we need the downtown lifestyle. We need to be focusing on these downtown core areas for this to happen here. So this is what the overall enablers look like. In terms of the barriers, the developers had a lot more issues with kind of incorporating these sort of practices than the other two groups. The car share organizations, what they saw as barriers was competition. So in a lot of other cities, there isn't just one car share organization, there's multiple. So they're fighting to kind of be able to get into these new buildings. It's also a risk, so if you sign a contract with the municipality and the developer that they're going to reduce their parking, you're going to put a car share car in there, that building's not going to come online for 12 to 24 months. So are you sure that that space and that location is going to be where you want that vehicle in 12 to 24 months? So there is some risk there. And then the parking policy, so whether it's actually, conducive to helping both the developers and the car share company come to an agreement. HRM planners, there's a lot of inconsistencies in terms of what the plans are and what's actually happening on the ground. So if you look at the regional plan, if you look at the functional planning strategy, they're at odds with each other a lot. And the process can be complicated. So for developers, there's kind of different ways that you get a parking or a development permit. Some of it has to go through public consultation, some of it doesn't, some of it's as of right, some of it isn't. And so there's no one set way that developers are able to build their buildings. So with the residential building developers, it's a long process to get those building applications in place. When I was talking to them, they said, yeah, car share sounds great. We can, add this amenity to the people that are renting here or have bought these condos in the surrounding community. But it's just such a long process, and when they have other changes that they want to do that go against the bylaws or, the planning documents in their area, they don't want to add parking onto it. So it's just, it needs to be easy for them. They have a million things that they're thinking about, and car share comes really low on the list. So it needs to be a very easy process. There's a financial expense in terms of, these projects are very expensive to get out of the ground. And they take, years to kind of have people, from the time that you're breaking ground to the time that people are there, there's a huge financial expense that comes there. So they need to make sure that that payoff is in enough time that it makes sense for them to go through the process of trying to reduce how much parking they have. They really found that there's a lack of leadership at the municipal level. So some developers and planners would say, yes, we want to do this is great, but then when it came to the end of the day that there was a signature on their building permit, it was really different what, kind of those two sides were. Definitely political obstacles and rigid policy. So when you look at the network diagram for this one, it looks a little bit different, but the common themes that are coming through with all three groups are the political obstacles, there's lack of support, the process is complicated and confusing, And the policy just isn't there for this to happen in HRM right now. So, what I found with all this is, for my recommendations and conclusion, we need to develop stronger relationships. It seems like people aren't talking to one another. CarShare needs to develop stronger relationships with the developers that are here and with the planners that are here to showcase how this has been successful in other cities. And they just need to sit in a room, I think, and just kind of show, like, these are the pros and cons of trying to reduce the number of parking stalls in a building, and why incorporating CarShare into this process is actually a huge benefit to not only the building, but to the community. Halifax, I think we need to do pilot projects. I think sometimes people are a little bit slow and not as progressive to get on board with innovative things. Not that CarShare is that innovative, it's been around since the 1940s, but I think that we need to test it out with maybe a smaller building, see how it works, and then show, here's best practices, or, how does this work for developers of different sizes in different locations. And then density bonusing, like I was talking before, I think that this is the key of how to get these parking easements into place at the municipal level. We're not going to change bylaws right now. They've been trying to do a center plan for the last 5 years and it still hasn't come out. So I think density bonusing is an option that you can, incorporate CarShare at the building level without having to go through a lot of hurdles. It's the easiest way to do it. Overall, there's really complex relationships that exist here. The other network diagrams, there's lines everywhere and much more nodes to them. But the great thing is that there are success factors that exist. So that means there is a way that we can do this in Halifax, that we can, encourage car sharing, we can encourage that we're not building as much parking, that we can get higher density on the peninsula in downtown Dartmouth, and, hopefully make our city a little bit better. So that's my presentation. That's what I worked on.
We have time for questions and comments and any discussion. Can I? Okay, I'm going to go
Yeah,
first.
go.
You commented about, well, I guess maybe 2 points. First of all, it seems to me if I were a developer building a building, it would depend very much on who was going to be moving into that. And you mentioned about students and others who might, there's such a range, right? On the other hand, there are expensive condos downtown that presumably wouldn't be so much a student market, there'd be other people moving there. I could imagine a situation where the actual value of the places that I, as a developer, are trying to sell, the units, would be higher if I could say, you have a guaranteed parking spot. Now, this is not for the students maybe, but for others, I don't know. You have, so the psychology and the financial aspect of that being able to promise that, which is what I gather the city is saying has to be the case anyway. So that, again, I would think, and developers would be ambivalent, and you highlighted the cost savings of not having a parking spot for everybody, but I wonder if you could comment on the opposite side, that maybe the developer's going to lose a bunch of money and the prices are going to drop because they, compared with their next door neighbor, aren't providing parking spots.
Yeah, so I think that that's a really good point. When I was interviewing developers, I interviewed a pretty big range of developers. So some that only targeted that student demographic, some that were exclusively in the condo market, some that did small scale projects, and others that were doing really large scale projects. And I think, what I heard from them was, there's areas and there's a demographic that yes, every single person or every single unit needs one, maybe 2 parking stalls. There's other developers that they know that they're only at a 15 to 18%, or that's how much parking is actually being used in their parking lots. And so I think that it depends on the developer. The developer knows their demographic more. Another example that I heard from a developer is that they had to charge, they had just a small condo building, I think it was only about 6 to 8 units. And it cost the people buying those condos an additional $60,000 to have that parking spot. And that was something that the developer was really pushing on the individuals as a selling feature for when they were gonna sell that condo afterwards. And I think that there's a little bit of a mind shift that we need to do as a culture, that I think we've been very dependent on having vehicles and, mostly single occupancy vehicles to take us to and from work and all those places. And I think that it's, Pam's philosophy of like, when you can walk, walk, when you can bike, bike, when you can take transit, when you need a car, here's a car. And that doesn't work for everyone. But it does work for some people, and I think it's trying to figure out what are those situations and where does this make the most sense. There was an aspect of this research when I was talking to developers and trying to figure out what their parking vacancy was, and most had some sort of vacancy. One of the developers downtown, they said that they rent out those parking stalls to people who are commuting in from, outlying areas and working downtown. And they, are able to rent them out at a monthly rate of whatever's on, the market price, so that was around $100. The payback period of renting out a parking spot at $100 when it costs you $60,000 to build it, you're still looking at 10 to 15 years to pay it off. So there's a lot of things going on. It's very dynamic in terms of what those decisions are. And I think I highlighted more the student population because that was such a great example of where this would really work. But you're right, there's some buildings, this would not work, and it would not be beneficial for the developer to try and reduce their parking spots. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. Other?
Yeah.
So are you looking at the building to concur the cost of the car share and to produce the insurance for that car share and to have that car share readily available at the building for whoever needs it? And would you, obviously there'd be a cost of having that parking spot there.
Yeah.
So would the person rent the parking spot, then rent the car from the car share, and then fill it up with gas as they return it to its parking spot?
That's a great question. So, how the car share organization works here, and every model is a little bit different, is you pay a membership cost. And then every time you rent a vehicle, so if you wanted to use a car from noon until 5 o'clock today, you'd see which cars were available, and you'd rent it for that time period. So there's an hourly and a per kilometer rate that comes with that cost. And so at the end of the day, I'm not sure what that would come up to, but whatever the total is, that includes, the rental for that parking spot, the insurance, the maintenance, the gas, everything, the windshield washer fluid, that there's air in the tires. So there's only one cost on the member of the car share organization. In terms of the car share organization working with the developer, they need to figure out a way that they're going to negotiate that parking spot. So is the developer just going to give that parking spot to car share as an in-kind donation? Or are they going to charge them a monthly rate? In Vancouver, what actually happens is they have an entire formula, and they say, if the developer needs to build X number of stalls, and we're going to reduce that, so that they build 10 less, but they have to incorporate car share. The city actually mandates the developer to purchase those 2 vehicles at the building level. Those 2 vehicles have to be in an open air parking lot, so they have to be able to be accessed by people in the community. They can't be behind barriers. So there are some logistical things that come with it in terms of where those vehicles are located, that the community at large can access them. But the developer in Vancouver, how it's seen is the developer has to purchase those vehicles because they're still realizing a cost savings by reducing the number of parking stalls that they have by 10. That is still in their favor after they've bought 2 vehicles. Does that make sense? It's kind of a runaround way, but Here, I don't know what that would look like. I think it's getting into the room with the stakeholders and figuring out, okay, so the developer's saving $100,000 because we're reducing how much parking they have. With that savings, do they need to purchase a vehicle? Do they just need to provide a stall? Do they have to give memberships to everyone in their vehicle or in their building? So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of play with that savings in a way that's still beneficial for the developer and is still growing the car share network for the community.
Is it viable for the car share to concur the cost of the, do they concur the cost of the windshield wiping fluid and the oil, do they?
All of it, yeah. So that's all on them, it's not on the person using the vehicle. It's supposed to be as easy for members as, as it can be. So essentially you have a fob and you do your booking online, you go to the vehicle, you fob in, the car unlocks, you take the car, you drive it wherever, you bring it back, you fob out, and then it will charge you for that time period. There's other models, like those one-way models, that you're only paying per minute that you're in the vehicle because you're taking it across town and that's that. So it depends. Here, you're only paying for the time and per kilometers that you're using. You don't have to pay for anything else.
If you want the car to go from here and across town, but you're not coming back with the car, does the car share go pick up that car and deliver back to the?
No, it would be the member's responsibility to take it back. So we have a round trip model here, and it's different in every city, and I think the one-way system, so for example, in Calgary, Car2Go came in, and Car2Go is owned by Mercedes-Benz. They have 100 smart cars, 100 maybe to 150. And what they say is within this geographical area, you can move these zip cars and you can rent them for as long as you need them, and you can drive it across town and you can pick it up in one location, drop it off in another location. And I think that part of the reason we haven't seen that one-way car share model here is we don't quite have the density or the membership base to be able to do it. We only have 35 cars here. So it would be, I don't think that it would serve the needs of the consumer if people were picking up and dropping off at different locations within the peninsula and downtown Dartmouth, but maybe we'll get there someday, so.
You're focused on Dartmouth, downtown, or Dartmouth, or Halifax?
Yeah, so where car share cars exist right now is Halifax Peninsula and downtown Dartmouth. So that's the only geographic location that they are at right now.
Would it be better to widen the spectrum of where those cars are so that they can be readily available to more people, if that's what you're going for? To friendly car share would be put those cars where they're needed.
Mm-hmm.
So would it not be beneficial to put those cars everywhere, not only in Dartmouth and downtown Halifax?
Ideally. But we only have 1,000 members, or the car share organization here only has 1,000 members, so they can only support 35 cars. If we had 10,000 members, then you'd see the network grow into other areas, but we just haven't reached that tipping point yet. But maybe one day. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the different classes of membership. For example, I'm going off a little bit, but I'll come back to my point, trust me. A few years back, SMU had some partnership with Nova Scotia Power. They had an electric car here on campus for anybody on campus to use.
Mm-hmm.
You'd register through security and so forth, book the car, do whichever you need to do. And that was really nice to have available on campus. So you're going off on a research project, you want to pick something up for school. And it was used quite well. And then I think facilities stopped doing that due to costs or something of the program. And that was quite disappointing because that meant all of us had to incorporate that cost under the individual budgets then of us having to rent cars or what have you, and that really increased the overall costs and budgets. So coming back to my point, it made me think during your presentation, is it possible to have an institutional membership, hospitals, universities, organizations, or so forth, that say they have this membership, have 2 or 3 cars on campus or on site, and that might be a good way to lead people to be more familiar, more comfortable with the idea of car sharing and that type of That was the answer I wanted, perfect, yes.
So I don't work for CarShare Halifax. I'm not sure exactly how all their memberships work, but I do know that there's an institutional and a business membership that, when I worked at Clean Nova Scotia, we had one as an organization, and we used it for meetings and things like that, and it just got billed right to the organization. So you didn't have to take your own vehicle, you didn't have to worry about renting a car or taking a cab. So I know that that exists. In terms of having vehicles on campus, what an awesome idea. I think that that's actually great in terms of having people become more familiar and seeing it. But that's a relationship that the university and the car share company have to come to, and that, was outside of the scope with this research. But in terms of my literature review, colleges, hospitals, they in other cities are really using car share services. So I think that that's definitely another opportunity. I think it's, kind of a business thing that I don't know how it works completely, so, yeah.
Do you have any suggestions on how to move forward on that to convince the university to go that route?
I could talk to you afterwards and get you in touch with Pam, because I feel like
email.
Pam.
I'm just thinking with the
Yeah.
weather coming today, maybe not,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
we can
I'll
certainly
grab your
back and forth.
email and get you in contact with Pam, because I think that, that's a great idea.
Great, awesome, thank you so much.
Sorry, just a
Yeah.
comment, maybe the School of the Environment can purchase a membership?
Sorry, Tony.
Yeah, put it on the logo, right, School of the Environment, right on the side of the car.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, whoever,
Did you, I know a couple of the developers are already partnering with CarShare Halifax in town. Did you talk to any of those developers specifically, and what's their opinion, what's their impression of the system? Do they like it?
Yeah.
Are they happy? Do they want to move forward?
yeah. So I did, I talked with, I think 3 out of the 5 had already had some sort of relationship. I think 2 of those developers actually had vehicles already on their site. And then the other 2 had no idea what CarShare was, understood that it was probably an amenity that people would like, but they weren't really sure what that meant. Sorry, wait, am I answering your question?
Well, just the ones that have it, are they happy with the program?
They are happy,
Do they
yeah.
find it a success, and are
Yeah.
their residents renting them out? Is it
Yeah.
working for them?
I didn't get into the detail of whether it's the residents that are renting them or whether it's the surrounding community. I didn't go into that data at all. Essentially how it works, and this might fit into your question a little bit in terms of where the locations are going. CarShare has the ability to look at, where the demand is, what cars are being most used, and that people can say, we really want a car here. So other cities, Vancouver for instance, they have a whole algorithm that tells them this is where the demand is, this is exactly where we want a car, and this is how we want to grow it. It hasn't been that sophisticated here just because we don't have the same sort of numbers as Vancouver or bigger cities. But people are liking it, but it also means that because there's only 35 cars, sometimes vehicles are getting moved around because, the demand just isn't there at a certain location, so they move it to where it is. So I think that it's still kind of a, I don't want to say like trial and error, but that it's still a learning process here.
Didn't you even say that it's actually bringing in new residents, that it's actually a good marketing tool for them?
I didn't hear that at all. No, but when I walked into one of them, they had like the CarShare pamphlet there.
Right.
I don't know that they're using it as a selling feature. I just don't know, yeah.
And just as an aside, personal note, I have a rental downtown.
Yeah.
And there's a waiting list for the parking, so there is demand for parking.
Oh.
And they have car share as well.
Interesting, so they didn't build enough.
Yeah.
Interesting. So in that situation, are you forced to find parking?
Yeah, street parking.
What about the winter?
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, so there's all different shapes and sizes that come with people that are, living in these buildings.
Just as and we've got other questions, but just as a quick follow-up to that, why is there a waiting list if the rule is that there has to be a parking spot for every resident?
Maybe they've got that fence when they got it. It's a fairly new building, so they may have said they put a car parking in.
Let me
Yeah,
clarify
sure.
that a little bit. The one-to-one, that's different everywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, so every single bylaw, it doesn't
Ah,
necessarily
ah.
say 1-to-1, maybe it says 0.7 to 1
Okay,
or 0.8 to 1 or 0.5 to 1. downtown Halifax is actually a very unique example, and there's no parking requirement whatsoever. It's completely up to the developer to say how much parking they want. So there is actually one development that's going up right now that's gonna have 0 parking. So that's very unique, it's a very small geographical area. Outside of that, there's a ratio, and it's not always 1-to-1. It depends on height, size, location, bylaws, old bylaws. So,
You can see the city's rationale that they don't want people scrambling for street parking
Yeah.
and going crazy with it, but.
Yeah. But then there's other cities that really are trying to minimize all of the parking in the downtown center because they don't want to encourage people to drive. Or you see a city like, I was talking to my brother-in-law the other day, he's in Calgary, it costs $600 a month to park your car in downtown Calgary right now because there's such a shortage, so it's better for him to just take the bus there. So there's different situations to encourage people, how they're getting around, how they're commuting. Every city does it differently, so, yeah.
You touched on it a bit, but you talked about a lot about developing infrastructure and how you're incorporating car sharing into that, but have you talked to already pre-developed buildings? How would they go about already established places and incorporating car sharing into those?
So that's an ongoing relationship that the car share organization has with different developers. So as to your question in terms of what are developers saying now, a lot of car share cars are happening there. You also come into the difficulty when it's an established building of whether there's open air parking that you can put those cars so that it can be accessed by the rest of the community. If they have underground parking and there's nowhere to put a car except for behind a gate, then it decreases the security for that building because you're letting the public into a locked garage. So there's difficulties that come with it. There's some situations that it's really easy because they have a location within, the development that they can park a car. So it's all very unique, and it's about that relationship building, and it's about one-on-one and talking, car share company talking to the developers in those situations and figuring out if it works, or the car share organization talking to the school, the university, and figuring out how does this work, where do we put this, what does the negotiation process look like, who's paying for the parking stall, is it a donation, is it, are we promoting it as a school, are we doing whatever, so those things come at kind of the business level and how they want to do their marketing or, brand themselves, so, yeah.
Any other comments?
Yeah,
Just a speculation in the future,
Yeah.
although it's not a speculation now, the autonomous car that's
Yeah.
coming online.
Yeah.
People's driving around Nevada right now.
Yeah.
Driverless cars. How's this play into the car share model? And even GM last week announced that they're moving towards car sharing under autonomous vehicles. That's one of their future objectives. How's that fit into local plans? How's it fit into parking?
I don't have a clue. However, I had a very long discussion with one of the planners locally, and he thinks that cars that drive themselves are going to be the transition of people getting out of their own vehicle. So he feels that that's just the next progression, that you don't have car share vehicles anymore, that you have these autonomous cars that you hop in with 3 other people to commute to work, and that people aren't driving anymore. I don't know what that's gonna look like, but maybe.
Yeah,
Maybe
some
people
are
just don't own cars anymore, that you
Yeah.
just call a number and figure out who's gonna pick you up and go. I have no idea.
Which is essentially Uber model plus without Uber without driver.
Exactly.
Which is coming
So it's kind of
along
like
quicker than-
a mix of both of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think will happen?
Well, I'm a futurist. I think this is gonna happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most people won't own their own car. You just pull up an app on your phone and say, I need a car here. It will magically arrive at your
Yeah.
door and take you where you need to go. So then you won't
Yeah.
need all these individual parking spots. It'll just be big holding areas
Yeah.
where the cars will circulate on the streets.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
And then if you get them electric and you're not using fossil fuels, and there's other benefits that can come
Yeah.
in terms of the environmental conversation. So, yeah.
Just on your point,
developer can't just purchase a car and spot that's just used for their own building?
They can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
definitely can. So an example where that takes place is Winnipeg. If the developer is going through a parking relaxation process with the municipality says you need to have a car share vehicle for your, for this parking relaxation. Nowhere within that contract does it say that you have to go with the car share organization or organizations that are in the town. However, it's 9 times out of 10, maybe higher than that it's easier for the developer to go with the car share organization because they're not in the fleet management business. So they can just, wipe their hands and say, this car share provider is going to provide this car in this spot, and I don't have to take care of it, but I'm meeting, the contract terms that I have with the municipality in terms of reducing parking spaces.
And
here.
that's when it has to be an open air.
Yeah, open air is ideal all the time. But if a developer, for whatever reason, said, I only want to have a car for this development and I'm going to provide that and I'm going to just have the front keys at the front desk and people can sign it out, that's how it works in Vancouver, or in Winnipeg. I don't know if that's ever actually happened because the car share organization I talked to there, they said that the developers always went with them because it was an easier solution for them, but they could do it themselves, so yeah.
That seems like potentially a nice model for a large building to, not to have it open air necessarily, but to have a, in their parking garage underground, to have a nice car that's sitting there for, just for their residents.
Yeah.
And they know it's not somebody coming in from outside, it's just there. I mean, to me, that would be a selling point for living in that particular building. But that's not, you're saying that's prohibited in the Halifax model at the moment?
No, a developer could do that right now if they
No,
want.
but I mean with car share. Car share Halifax wouldn't do that.
Car share Halifax would not come on board with that.
But
Yeah.
I don't see why they wouldn't be more flexible and say, yeah, that's a way we can put one of our cars in there just dedicated to that building and see how it works.
I think it's, well, you'd have to talk to car share, but I think it's based on how much it's being used. So if that building is only using it at 25% capacity, but the 10-block radius is going to increase it to another 25%, and that car is going to be at 50% if it's opened up to the whole community, then that's better in car share's perspective. But I don't know all the numbers behind it. That's only me speculating.
Yeah. Anything else? No. Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, Julia. That's
You're
really
welcome.
interesting.
Thanks, guys.